Hi everybody, Steven here. So we're going to build a vSphere cluster and we're going to enable it for Distributed Resource Scheduler. If you're not sure what that is, stick around. That's what we're going to talk about. See you in a bit. Hi everybody, thanks for sticking around. So why don't we jump right into it. So let me get my screen and iPad going here. Before I actually begin, if this is content that you kind of like, please do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. It's free. It just takes a click of a button. Okay, it helps me out quite a bit. Okay, so anyways, let's jump on to this. So let's talk about what DRS is. Let's talk about what a cluster is. So let's first take a look at what a cluster is. So if you've been following along in my little series, I've set up iSCSI, I've played with vMotion. Now we're going to get into clusters, right? So I'm going to right click on my data center and I'm going to pick new cluster. And a cluster, all it really is an object that contains your ESXi host. So we'll see that in a second, right? So the first thing it's going to ask you is what's the name of the cluster? I'm going to call mine cluster-01. Call it something that makes sense, management cluster, you know, SQL, SAP cluster, whatever that workload is, whatever kind of makes sense for you. You'll notice that there's a bunch of services that we can enable. I'll talk about those later, but right now this video is just focusing on DRS. I'm going to leave this deselected for now. Manage all hosts in a cluster with a single image. I'll talk about that in a separate video as well when we talk about lifecycle management. But for now, let's just create a simple cluster, and that's it. I'll say next. It gives me a summary. I hit finish. Pretty simple. There's the cluster. All it is an object in vSphere. Now, what you see here, now that if I select the cluster, you'll see over here, I've got this cluster quick start wizard. You could use this if you want to, and this kind of holds your hand through the process. So you can go in here, well, what do I want to do in the cluster basics? Do I want to go in and add services? Do I want to add more hosts? Do I want to configure the cluster's networking features? This is a wizard to hold your hand through it if you're kind of new. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really use the wizards that often because they weren't around all the time. So I'm used to doing everything manually. So I can leave this here. I'm going to say skip quick start. Now watch what happens. This tab contains simplified configuration workflow. They're talking about quick start. If you dismiss quick start workflow, you will not be able to restore it and will need to continue configuration manually. I'm cool with that. So again, if you say quick, you know, you're not going to be able to activate it again. So I'll say fine, whatever, continue. And that's it for my quick start. Now I'm going to show you, I'm going to add some hosts to this. It's really simple. I can click on the button here. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to drag and drop my host right onto my cluster. There's my 3 hosts. If I expand it, there's my clusters, and you see I got a bunch of VMs. Since our last video, I've actually created a bunch of virtual machines specifically for this exercise. Now you'll notice what's going on in the background here. This deploy OVF template. What's going on there? It's deploying some VMs. More on that in a second, okay? We'll let it do its thing. So let's go back to our cluster. Let's go into configure, and then I'm going to select DRS, Distributed Resource Scheduler, and I'm going to click edit. And then I can actually turn it on if I want to, okay? So before we take a look at that, let's talk about what a DRS cluster is. So let me go back to my iPad. So a cluster that's enabled for DRS, let's say I've got some ESXi hosts here. So this is ESXi. Let's say I got a couple of them, ESXi. I'll draw another one, just ESXi. I got a bunch of them, okay? This is my cluster, let's say, all right? That's my cluster. On my host, I now have VMs that are running. So the green boxes represent virtual machines. Maybe I got a couple there, a couple there, a couple there. Now, what DRS does, in just a really quick high-level look at it, think of it as load balancing your VMs. Now, it's not quite exactly like that, but again, it can balance the load across your hosts. Now, what does it look at? It actually looks at the virtual machine's resources to make sure it's getting the CPU and memory resources. And if it goes, hey, you know what? This VM over here doesn't seem to be getting its resources, it can utilize vMotion, which I talked about before, and it can migrate, it has the capabilities of automatically migrating that VM from one host to another So it can get its CPU and memory resources. So that's kind of one way you can kind of think of it. It's almost like a load balancing, right? It's not quite exactly like that, but you can think of it like that. So again, if this VM right here wasn't getting its resources, DRS can do a couple of things. It could automatically vMotion that VM over there. If it's unable to vMotion that VM for whatever reason, if it can't vMotion it, it can still make a recommendation saying, hey, let's move this over to that host, okay? There's different automation levels for DRS, and I'll talk about that. For DRS to work in what we call fully automated mode, it's best if all the VMs can be vMotioned back and forth. Hence, you need some kind of shared storage for all the VM's files to reside, if that kind of makes sense. Okay, so take full advantage of DRS. All your VMs should be able to be vMotion. So let's jump back and take a look at some of the settings now. Okay, so here we are. So some of the settings, first of all, is fully automated, manual mode, or partially automated. Notice fully automated was the default. What's manual mode? So see, it says here, manual. DRS generates both powered on placement recommendations and migration recommendations. So manual mode means DRS will not power on a VM on any particular host. It'll ask you, hey, I'm going to recommend that you power this VM on this host. And you say yes, okay? Now, if there's an imbalance, let's say VMs are not getting some of the resources, DRS will not migrate VMs. Remember I said it could use vMotion? In this case, it won't. It'll just make recommendations. Up to you if you want to apply those or not. So let's take a look at that. Let's go manual mode. I'll say OK. And you'll notice some VMs were actually created down here. Let's take a look at that later. I'm going to right-click on Win10-1. I'm going to say Power On. Now notice it's asking me, where do you want to power on the VM? So it's giving me a choice, okay? Because I picked manual mode. Oh, I'll power it on host 1, whatever. Great. So now that VM is going to be powered on host 1. Let's go over here. May take a few seconds to update. There we go. Right over there, host 1. Okay? Let's go back to DRS. Edit settings. Let's change it to partially automated. So partially automated, when you turn on the VM, DRS will say, hey, I'm going to power this VM on this host because it has the most resources or the available resources to satisfy that VM. Now, if there's an imbalance in the cluster or if the VMs is not getting its resources for whatever reason, DRS will not automatically move VMs around. It's up to you. It'll make recommendations. Up to you to move them if not. That's partially automated. Let's say OK. Let's see how that works. Let's power on VM10-2 or Win10-2. Power on. Don't make a liar out of me. And at that point, we see it's powered on. Which host did it powered on? It didn't ask me. So DRS made a decision, and it powered on, in this case, host 3. Okay? These VMs are not doing a whole lot of stuff, to be honest with you. Okay? So that's kind of neat. Let's go back to our cluster. I'm not going to do fully automated, because let's go into here. Again, if I go fully automated, if I go fully automated, again, DRS will automatically play VMs on a host when I power them on. And if there's an imbalance, if the VMs are not getting the resources, it will utilize vMotion to migrate things around. So we need vMotion in order to do this stuff. In my lab, or my demo, I'm just going to leave it as partially automated. Okay. Actually, you know what? So you see recommendations. I'm going to force it to manual mode. Okay. Just there's a reason why I'll explain later. Migration threshold. This is how conservative or how aggressive you want DRS to be on making sure VMs get the resources. Now, all the way down here, this is priority 1. So you got priority 1 recommendations. DRS will only apply recommendations that must satisfy cluster constraints like affinity rules and maintenance mode. So what are they talking about there? Conservative, if you've got this all the way down, DRS doesn't care about your VMs getting the resources. It will not make recommendations for your VMs to get resources. So conservative means I don't care about the VM's resources. I do care about certain cluster constraints like affinity and anti-affinity rules. Now, what are those? An affinity rule says, hey, DRS, keep the VMs together on the same host. That's an affinity rule, right? An anti-affinity rule, it says DRS keep these VMs on separate hosts. Okay, when would you want to keep them together? So an affinity rule is if you got two VMs that talk to each other a lot, why not just have them on the same host? This way they don't have to exit the host and go across the wire to get to another host to talk to each other. Again, unless those VMs are on different VLANs, then well, you're going to exit the host anyways, unless you're playing with NSX. Anyways, enough of that. So keep the VMs together if they're talking to each other a lot. Anti-affinity rules, let's keep them apart. The first thing that might pop in your head, and I've noticed most people, they think performance. Oh, these two machines are very resource intensive. Let's separate them. No. Don't think like that. Think high availability. So I don't want to have all my DNS servers, all my domain controllers, all my web servers, let's say, running on the same host. Because if that host dies, well, goodbye to all my web servers or my domain controllers or my DNS. So you want to make anti-affinity rules. Hey, keep these guys on separate hosts. So in case of host failure, it doesn't impact that, okay? So you want to think about that. So that's conservative. Conservative, number one, will only make recommendations when you're breaking those rules. When there's two VMs on the same host that should be, for whatever reason, it's going to make, hey, you need to separate those. The next one up is priority 2. DRS only provides recommendations when workloads are extremely imbalanced. So when you got some of your VMs that are not getting a fair amount of their resources, DRS will say, yeah, you know what? I should probably make a recommendation that you move those VMs off that host and put it somewhere. But again, those VMs, it's got to be pretty extreme for it to make those recommendations. The default setting is number 3, priority 3. Again, same thing as number 1, but now workloads are still in balance, but they're moderately, not extremely, but moderately in balance. So they're moderately not getting their resources. Number 4, which is more aggressive, again, same as number 1, but it says it provides recommendations when workloads are fairly in balance. So, so we do care a lot more about that. And then last but not least is aggressive. Again, we do everything as number 1, but if there's any slight imbalance, so some of your VMs are getting not quite the resources that they should, but just a slight amount that they're not getting, DRS is going to make recommendations. So this is something you're going to want to play with. Starting off at number 3, probably not a bad idea. Predictive DRS. Well, let's think about this one for a second. Let me click on that information button. Here they talk about VMware ARIA, I can't pronounce it, ARIA Operations Manager. It used to be vRealize Operations. Now, what is this saying? Let me cancel this. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Sorry about that. Let's go back into there. Go back and edit. There we go. We're over here. Predictive DRS. Now, let's think about this for a second. For DRS to make a recommendation or move a VM for me, it's based on if the VM can't get its resources. So there's a problem right there. The VM can't get its resources. So that's when DRS kind of kicks in. It either makes a recommendation or moves it for me, depends on if I am fully automated or not. Okay, fully automated, it will move it automatically for me. All right, so we see that the VM's got a problem. Okay, it's not getting its resources, and that's when DRS comes in. Predictive DRS, and I remember doing this at IBM many years ago. We actually installed various management software on the servers, and a lot of customers didn't realize that the software was actually monitoring the health of the machine, and over time it can make recommendations for you. And I've actually walked into some customers' places and I said, oh, you know what? You may have a memory issue next month here, right? Just by the way things are working out or the way it's observing things. And they would say, yeah, whatever. And the next month would come and they had a memory issue. Same kind of concept here with operations, area operations. It can actually look at your workloads, your hosts, your VMs, and it can kind of predict, you know what, I think we may have an issue here with this VM. It may not get access to whatever its CPU or memory resources. Let's migrate it before it becomes a problem. So that's kind of cool. So that's disabled by default. You can enable it. The last one is virtual machine automation enabled. I would prefer this if it was word virtual machine override or something like that, right? But this is automation we're talking about here, right? So notice over here I've got this set to manual mode, partially automated, or fully automated. I'm putting it back to, let's say I put it to fully automated, just for argument's sake. I'm going to say, yeah, DRS, you do everything for me, man. You're the best. I love you, right? Do everything for me. But hang on a second. There are some VMs I don't want you messing with, like maybe my database server. I'm going to go in and set those VMs, the automation level, to manual mode. if I wanted to, okay? Because I don't want you moving things around or doing anything. I want to have a bit more control over it. So that's totally up to you. That's enabled by default, and you can actually do that. Let me put this back to manual mode. There's a reason why I'm doing manual mode. Additional options, virtual machine distribution. Okay, this is actually an interesting one. So I kind of, I can't remember when this came out. I think it might have been version 6, 5 or something like that. Don't quote me. But before that, I would just say DRS, all it cares about is your VMs getting its resources. End of story. So once they get the resources, great. Now, one of the things I haven't talked about is a thing called vSphere high availability. What happens if a host fails, right? Well, all the VMs on that host died. Well, we want them to fail over. I'll do a video on that. Virtual machine distribution with DRS, basically you're saying, hey, DRS, please try to keep an even number of VMs across the host. By default, it doesn't care about that. I could have 10 VMs running on this host, 2 on that host, and 1 on that host over there. It doesn't care as long as the VMs are getting their resources, okay? Which makes perfect sense. But what happens if that first host with the 10 VMs dies? Now we got a failure event that's affecting 10 VMs and not 2 or 1. Okay, so this VM distribution kind of gives you a little bit of control over that. I want to be able to distribute the load from a VM's perspective kind of evenly. So in case there is a failure, it's not as much of an impact for me. Now notice there it says enforce more even distribution of VMs across hosts in the cluster for availability. May see degradation of DRS when utilizing the settings. So again, you're basically saying I'd rather have an even number of VMs across. Some VMs not getting their resources. I can live with that, right? Because that's what that's saying here. CPU overcommitment, you can also, it's disabled by default. Some customers will say, okay, we're allowed to have, let's say, 5 virtual CPUs to every 1 physical CPU on a host. This setting here allows you to specify that, to kind of override it. So you're going to tell, DRS what your overcommitment is. I'll allow 2 virtual CPUs for 1 physical CPU, that type of thing. I'm going to leave that off. Now, scalable shares, enable scalable shares for resource pools in a cluster. I haven't done a video on resources. I plan on doing one because there's a lot to talk about there. But there's a thing called shares, limits, and reservations. I'll do a separate video on shares. I'll come back to this one. I don't want to leave you hanging here, but the scalable shares, doing this at a resource pool level, at the cluster level, I don't know if it's a good idea. If you're playing with resource pools, this is a feature of version 7 that came out. If you're playing with resource pools to prioritize VMs using pools, you may want to set that at a root pool that you create instead of the cluster one. But anyways, I'll come back and address that one later, okay? Power management, a lot of people, this has been around for, I'm about to say decades, but it's not decades. It's been around for definitely over a decade. This was around, if I remember correctly, it was beta in 3.0, woohoo, way back. And I think it was still beta maybe in 3.5. I can't remember. But distributed power management, notice it's disabled by default. This is to host as what DRS is to VMs. Now, what this means is, let's say, a lot of people don't enable this. But anyways, let's say you've got a bunch of hosts that are running VMs. Okay? Your business is 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. When people come in, all the resources are being used. Now they decide to go home at the end of the day. All the resources utilization drops. Now you got 10 servers running, and these VMs are all idle. If you enable distributed power management, and maybe I'll do a video on that just to show you down the road. I don't know, I'll have to see. If you enable that, what it will do, it'll say, you know what? I don't need any of those. I got 10 servers running here. Everybody's idle. I don't need 7 of them, right? Let me migrate the VMs, vMotion them across to these other hosts, so there's no outage. And I'm going to I will power down, I know I shouldn't say power down, but I'll power down those hosts, those 7 hosts, so we're not wasting electricity. Now, it's not really powering down, it's like a sleep state. Now, let's say everybody starts to come back in the morning, right? And the demand for resources start to increase. DRS can say, hey, you know what? I need these. We're starting to see an increase in resource requirements for CPU memory. Let me turn on, these servers, and actually you could use it through IPMI, Wake on LAN. IPMI is Intelligent Platform Management Interface. So if you've got like some kind of management card in your server for whatever vendor, it could talk to that card and turn on the host, right? And then when the host comes on, it can migrate VMs over there. Most people don't enable this because most businesses, I guess, can afford the power. That all depends on where you are. But also, I would imagine that management software out there monitoring servers, when it sees a bunch of servers going offline, they tend to freak out, so they don't usually enable this. If you know somebody's using this, let me know. I'd really like to see that. I've seen it in action. I've set it up many years ago, but it's not very popular. And then advanced options here, certain options and values you can set. We won't get into that. So these are all the different settings you can set at DRS. Now, yeah, this all looks good. I'll say, okay, I'm in manual mode. Let me say okay there. Let me do this. Let me select my cluster. I'm going to go to summary. And when I come down here, you'll see there's a DRS score. 99%. It's green, right? So anything between 80 and 100 is green. And I got 2 VMs. That means everybody's happy. Green is good. Anything else is kind of sort of bad, right? Let's start powering on some VMs here. Now, first of all, let me do something, okay? That I don't suggest you do in production. So Win the 1 is on host 1. Win 2 is on host 3. Let me put Win 2 on host 1. And I'm doing a vMotion right now. Host 1, compatibility, there we go. There, and there we go. So, there we go. I'm doing a vMotion on that. It's not the quickest in my lab environment. There we go. Normally it's a lot faster. I've actually changed a few things in my lab environment for this particular demo anyways, and I notice it's making it sluggish. I'll just be polite and say it like that. Okay. Normally that vMotion's a lot faster. So I'll probably speed this up or pause it. Okay, it completed. Took a few more seconds. Let me power on this VM here. So let's power on. I got a manual mode. It's going to ask me which host. I'm going to force everything into the host 1. Okay. I'm going to right click on this, power on. Hopefully I don't kill host 1 too badly. My hosts are all nested. In other words, these hosts are VMs, okay? And I got 8 processors. These VMs here, these Windows VMs, actually have 2 processors each. So I want to force it to basically see an issue. And I've got other methods to force it to see an issue if this doesn't work. There we go, power on. And let's see what we see here. I'm going to select the cluster, and I'm going to go to summary. And I just turned this stuff. Oh, there we go, boom. Now, I just powered these on. This wouldn't be a fair, like in real time, in the real world, this wouldn't be fair because I just dumped a bunch of VMs on a host, and these things are powering up. They're looking for CPU and memory, right? They're touching all their memory, all that kind of stuff. So it's going to redline it, okay? Now, if I walk away, come back in 10 minutes, this may level out a bit. But you can see right off the bat, there's an issue here, right? Like, pretend these were running for half an hour, and I come over here, wow, 5 VMs are very upset. They're not getting the resources. I can click on View All VMs, and then this DRS score comes up and shows me there's the VMs. This one's got 2%, 3%. Everybody's below 20%, right? So some of the VMs all these VMs are very upset, all right? Now let's go into, under Monitor, let's go into Recommendations. I'm sure, there we go. Because I got it set at manual mode, right? Or let's say if I had it at partially automated, right? It's making recommendations. If I had it fully automated, it would just migrate the VMs around for me. If it can't migrate because vMotion's not working on that VM, then it comes up and it'll make a recommendation. So I can go here and say, yeah, okay. I can select all, go ahead and make the recommendation, and then I can basically, apply recommendations. Now, if I hit that button, it's going to basically do a vMotion for me. Actually, let me do that. So I'll say apply recommendation. And I could have select them all, and it would do them all. I don't want to waste time on this YouTube video, but I could have done it instead of just doing one at a time. Now you see how fast my vMotions are going. It's not the snappiest. It's my lab environment, so I got to relook at that. But again, normally it would just be done pretty quick. I'll tell you what I've changed in my lab environment. I normally use vSAN. I'm actually using FreeNAS as my storage on here, and I can't see that causing it, but whatever. I have to do a little bit more investigating, but I've done this so I could actually do a few other things later on. So it's migrating and whatnot. Let's go over. Okay, so excuse me. We see that it's finished its migration. Let's go back to the cluster and then go to the summary tab and see what we kind of see here. Now again, oh, it's showing that all 5 are happy now because it kind of settled down a bit. Let's go back to the VMs here. So we see that they're all above 94%. Now these VMs are idle. I'm not really doing anything, but you see when I powered them up, it freaked out, right? Had that initial freak out because the VM powered up, it's touching all its memory, hitting the processor, and all these guys are doing their stuff. Now, if I had workloads running in there, the same kind of thing would apply. Let's go back to recommendations. It still has some recommendations for balancing here. Let's actually click on this Run DRS now. This doesn't run in real time, okay? So you got to kind of watch out for that. It does, I think it was as of 7. It checks like every second, right? Notice this recommendation is to balance the CPU load. This one's to balance the CPU load. If I had one before saying balance the memory load. So I can do stuff like that. So I could say, okay, select all, apply the recommendations, and it would go ahead and do it, okay? Do I want to do that in this case? All right, you know what? Let's do something different here. Let's try something out here. Let's look at Windows 1, and let's see Windows 1 is running on host 2. Let's look at Windows 2. Windows 2 is running on host 1. All right, good. Let's try something out here. Let's go into cluster. Let's go into configure. There's my DRS. Let's go down in here now. You'll see down in here you'll see VM's host groups, VM host rules, and VM overrides. Let's see the VM overrides. Since I did mention that, remember that was checked off. Let me just in case it was such a long time ago. When I go to here, virtual machine automation. That's what that's talking about right there, because that's selected. Let me go into there, and let's go into virtual machine overrides. And this is where I can go and add VMs I want to override the DRS settings. So let me pick Win4. I'll say next. Okay. Over here is where I can now. I haven't talked about HA yet. We'll talk about that in another video. But this is where I can actually override the DRS automation level. Manual mode, again, maybe I got it set to fully automated, and this is my database server, and I go, no, I want more control. I want manual mode. When I turn it on, I want to pick the host, and don't migrate it for me. Partially automated, same kind of thing. When I turn on the VM, okay, you put it on the host you choose, but don't move it for me afterwards, or you go fully automated. What's disabled? Disabled means DRS, don't do anything with this VM. Don't even make recommendations. Don't even monitor it. You know the scoring system? I don't care about this VM. Don't monitor it. That's what disable is. I'm not going to override the settings on this VM, but again, I'll talk about HA stuff later. I'm going to cancel that. That's what VM overrides are. Now, let's look at VM to host rules. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to go add a rule. And I'll call, I said Win1 and Win2. Keep Win1 and 2 apart. No, they're on the same host. One, same host. Okay. So this is where, again, the rules enabled. This is where you can keep your virtual machines together. That's an affinity rule. Separate virtual machines. That's an anti-affinity rule. Virtual machines to host. I'll show you that one in a second. And virtual machine to virtual machine. I'll mention that one in a second. Let's do keep these VMs together. Remember they are, and I'm going to go and add, was Win1 and Win2. And I'll say OK. And I'll say OK. We'll give it a few seconds here. And there's my rule. Keep Win1 and Win2 on the same host. Keep them together, okay? Now, if I click over here, you see Win1 is on, where are you? Host 2. Win2 is on host 1. Let's go into my cluster. Let's go into monitor. Let's go into recommendations. Okay, balance load. I may have to run recommendation here. There we go. There we go. It came up. Migration to. It's telling me because of an affinity rule, I need to migrate one of these guys. Okay. So I can say, yeah, okay, apply this, and I'll say apply recommendation, right? So now if I had said, now it's doing a vMotion for me. That might take a bit of time. So if I had set this to fully automated, because right now I'm in manual mode, or if I was in partially, it would do the same thing. If I had it fully automated, as soon as I made that rule, it would automatically move the VMs around to adhere to that rule, okay? We'll let that run, okay? I'm curious what my resources are like. I can click on the cluster, summary. It looks like everybody's still happy. Nobody's using anything. Everything's idle, right? That's why everybody's happy, okay? And remember, generally we don't migrate VMs if they're getting the resources, because just think of it this way. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So why migrate a VM when it's getting its resources? Like I said, let's go back to the configure the cluster, and we'll go edit. And, oh, no, I don't want to do that, sorry. We'll go back into virtual machines host rules. So I created a rule there to keep them together. I could create a rule to keep them apart. By the way, no, it's still doing its thing, right? Let's do VM host groups. I can create groups. So let me create a group here. I'll add a group, and I'll call it, I don't know, app1, okay? App1, and it's a virtual machine group. And I'll go in there and I'll say, okay, app1 is Windows 3 and Windows 4, these VMs. That's app1. I could create another group, app2, and put it in VMs. VMs could be part of multiple groups if I wanted to. And I'm just going to say, okay, I'm going to keep this simple. Then I'm going to create another group. I'll create this as a host group. Maybe this is Blade Center 1, right? And I'm going to add members. Maybe host 1 and 2 are in this group, okay? And I can create other groups as well. I'm going to say okay. So now I can actually go into virtual machine host rules. Let me click on this. Just like my affinity and anti-affinity rules, I go add. I'll give it a rule. Could it stay on host group, whatever. You can say keep VMs together. And I'm going to say virtual machines to host. Now it's asking me for groups. There's my app group, and I can say host group. Now notice the choices here. I can say app group VMs must run on host in the Blade 1. In other words, those VMs in app group must run on the Blade 1 group. In other words, that was hosts 2 and 3, right? Or 1 and 2, whatever. I can say must run, should run. So must run basically means they have to run on those hosts and no other hosts. If those host dies and there's 100 other hosts available, too bad. Maybe some kind of licensing thing you got going, right? Or should run on basically means those hosts in that group, I want the VMs to run there. But if those hosts die, it's okay to run somewhere else. Must not run on the host group, or should not run on the host group. So you've got a lot of flexibility there depending on how you look at things, okay? I'm not going to create that group. I'm not going to create that rule. I don't get enough hosts to kind of demo that. So there's my VMs are all, let's look at, was it Win 1 and Win 2 in that affinity rule? So it's on host 3. Win 2 is on host 3 as well, okay? I think that is about it. So, hey, if you stuck around this long, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate it. Also, leave comments down below. I answer to all my comments. And, if there's something you want to see or do or whatever, hey, leave a comment down below about that. I do have limited resources, but I'll do my darndest, my best, okay? I also have NSX videos as well. I got other stuff coming out, content library, a whole bunch of other things coming up as we go through. But I think that's it for this video. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Bye now.